Hello, Internet. It's your boy, MC Gingerbread, back at it with another complaining video. With this one, I wanted to be a little bit more personal because I wanted to talk about politics. So, without further ado, let's get right to it. As the day gets closer to our next big election, and one of the biggest shooters of the year just released, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, I see it kind of necessary to talk about video games and the seemingly endless disdain for politics in video games. As politics and news media has become ever present in our daily lives, we seem to become more aware of political viewpoints seeping into our entertainment media, whether it be movies, TV shows, or video games. But as this continues, so does the outcries of people viewing these mediums for us to remove politics from them because it ruins the experience. And I think that's just an asinine argument, as politics has always been in video games since the beginning, and they will continue to be in video games until they cease to exist. Let's first talk about the big name game series that tried its damnedest to be apolitical while still being one of the most political video game series of all time, and that is Call of Duty. Even with the name itself is derived from a political need in order for you to answer your call of your country and do your duty and serve your people. War is inherently political. There is no example of war that isn't started by some kind of politics, except for maybe the Trojan War, where some dude got salty that his wife cheated on him with a dude named Paris, no less, that he went to war over. Other than that, all wars were started by politics and can kind of be seen as a version of politics, just a really, really violent version. Even with how mindless and non-thought-provoking Call of Duty's gameplay can sometimes be, they are still making a stance on certain political viewpoints on who is good and who is bad. Some can even say that militaristic video games can be seen as propaganda, using video games as a medium to shed a flattering light on a not-so-flattering situation. A video game example of that would be 6 Days in Fallujah, which is a great example of how the government wanted to shape the perspective of a political battle and form it into a more empathetic viewpoint in the eyes of the American soldiers. The announcement that this game was going to be stripped of all political viewpoints was met with immediate backlash, as even veterans of this controversial battle and this controversial war stated that taking the politics out of this battle would not portray a truthful image of the battle and its consequences. Politics in video games can stretch all the way back to the beginning of gaming. There are many examples of video games that have political viewpoints, like Final Fantasy VII and the eco-terrorist organization that you come to befriend and party with throughout the story. Fallout and its disdain for war and how it will seemingly all end with a dystopian hellscape inhabited by purely survivors of a horrific and brutal war. Beyond Good and Evil, where Jade essentially is uncovering a global conspiracy and how freedom of speech is one of our most important freedoms in our world and necessary to keep people in power in check. Mirror's Edge is another game that echoes the ideology about the extreme need for information and how it's invaluable in a functioning society. Freedom Fighters, Turning Point, Fall of Liberty, and Wolfenstein are huge examples of nationalism in video games where seemingly innocent civilian lives are upended and thrown in direct conflict with invading forces on American soil, and how those unassuming regular people can end up being pivotal characters in resistances. The BioShock series shows the dangers of benevolent dictators that believe their ideologies where they see themselves as a hero and how the road to hell can be paved with good intentions. Half-Life 2, one of my most cherished video games of all time, is another political game similar to the aforementioned nationalist games of Wolfenstein and the like, but set in a more fantastical setting where Gordon Freeman navigates the underground human resistance that fights to take back the world they once knew. Metal Gear Solid is easily one of the most politically influenced games of our time. It tackles a multitude of different subjects, all from previous games like I mentioned. There are conspiracies, there's corrupt governments, there's a war and a conflict, all while focusing on the epic individual struggle of morality and this ever-graying political landscape. These games were about individuals and their struggle through politics, how politics can influence good people into becoming monsters they once sought to fight against. But one of my all-time favorite political video games I'm going to gush about is Spec Ops: The Line. Spec Ops: The Line came out in 2012, right after the hype train of Call of Duty Modern Warfare series is kind of slowed to an almost halt after the subpar introduction of Call of Duty Ghosts and the even worse Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. Spec Ops came out not to dive into the cultural zeitgeist that was wartime shooters, but instead point out the flaws in logic and the moral hypocrisies of the games like Call of Duty seem to embrace so heavily. Spec Ops started out with a seemingly generic mission to go into a crumbling Middle Eastern city devastated by a large storm and unending militaristic conflict and rescue the remaining people and evacuate them. As the game progresses, though, you seem to be put in situations in increasingly morally gray choices as you fight to protect your sense of heroism in this dystopian landscape that surrounds you. You make more and more horrific choices as you navigate this city, hoping that in the end, all the situations will prove themselves as necessary to fight for the greater good. Then the game turns the entire narrative on its head, and it has the main character, you, and the player confronting with the atrocities that you've committed throughout the game. It is easily one of the most thought-provoking narratives ever written into a militaristic shooter, or, in my eyes, any game ever. Sadly, there aren't very many video games that grapple with this kind of topic like Spec Ops was willing to deal with in a very long time. Not to say that there aren't games nowadays that don't make people struggle with the eternal politics of our day-to-day lives. Papers, Please, and Disco Elysium are two amazing examples of games that do just that, and if you haven't played them yet, I highly recommend you check them out, as they are not only entertaining, but hilarious and fun to play through, and Disco Elysium having a huge amount of replay value in particular because it has so many narrative choices that you can go through throughout the game. All in all, what I'm trying to say is that games are almost always going to have some kind of inherent political stance that it takes, even if it's small and unassuming, or even perhaps satirical and subversive, like the ever-popular Grand Theft Auto series. There is at no point where a game that is trying to tell a story isn't going to come to a crossroads where it has to make a choice politically. Every game does. And if it doesn't, then there will be no inherent value in the story. And I guarantee it will not grasp players nearly as much as one that wears its politics on its sleeve. So if you are one of those people that are complaining that video games need to stop being political, then just go play solitaire or something and shut up and let the rest of us enjoy our narrative-driven stories with great plots and immersive storytelling. Games have always had a political meaning or choices to them, and the only reason that you see them more often than you used to is because they are more apparent in video games since news media is so prevalent in our normal lives and we are more attuned to noticing them. They are no different than the video games of your yesteryears, and you're just looking at everything through nostalgia goggles, which isn't a bad thing. But when you try and argue that games are too political nowadays, you're just ruining it for everybody else that just wants a good and interesting story in the video game medium. Or at least those are my thoughts on this viewpoint. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to leave some comments down below if you disagree or agree. And I know I enjoyed writing it. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it. Hope you have a good day, guys.